In this video, we're going to talk about position in poker and why position is so important. So let's start off our discussion with some definitions. So position in poker, what does it mean? Well, just like its name implies, it's when we're in position to our opponents who act before us. And conversely, when we're out of position, it's when we're first to act and our opponents are going to act after us. So for example, let's say that we open raise under the gun and all of our opponents are left to act, middle position, cut off, button, small blind, and big blind. Well, we're going to be out of position to our opponents that are left to act. But conversely, let's say that we are not opening an under the gun. Let's say somebody raises an under the gun and we're on the button and we decide to call. Well, then we're in position to the under the gun raiser. So that's what position is. So let's talk about a second definition, positional awareness. Positional awareness is knowing what position you're in relative to your opponents and if you are at a positional advantage or disadvantage. So it's just being aware of the concept of position and knowing whether you're in position or out of position. Now, why is position so important? So why do we call it the power position? Well, we're utilizing information gained while playing hands in position that allows us to make better decisions than our opponents. Because poker is a game of imperfect information, meaning there's lots of unknowns, the more information that we can gain in a hand, the better. And when we're in position, we're able to do this because we get to see what our opponent does on every single round. So if our opponent open raises under the gun, we get to see what they do pre-flop in terms of the raise sizing and so forth and their ranges. On the flop, again, they have to act before us. On the turn, same thing. On the river, same thing. So this gives us a lot of added value of playing in position, a lot of extra information. And then on the flip side, when we play hands out of position, we're at a positional disadvantage. So essentially, when I'm under the gun and I'm open raising and a good opponent calls on the button, I'm at a positional disadvantage to them because they get to see what I do on every single round before they have to act. So that's some basic definitions. Now, let's talk about why money flows towards the button. And I have a diagram here, the same diagram as the other page. And what you're going to notice is that I took a snapshot quite some time ago when I first created this lecture of some hands. And this looks like it's roughly around 55,000 hands. And what you're going to notice with this is that from early position all the way to late position, the amount of money that I win increases. So in the small blind, I am losing money. In the big blind, I'm losing money. And in fact, we should expect to lose money in the blinds. And then I start to win money in early position under the gun. And then it starts to creep up more and more and more to the point where I'm winning most of my money on the button. So minus $22 from the small blind all the way up to a positive $180 on the button. So why is this? Well, let's talk about this with my bullet points that I have over here. Well, we make more money in position because of our positional advantage. And when we're out of position, we have a positional disadvantage. So if we think about it, it's very much harder to play hands out of position than when we're in position. So why is this? Well, I alluded to this on the previous slide, is that we get to see what our opponents do before we get to act. So we have more information than they do in the hand. And this is huge. Secondly, we get to dictate how the hand is played. And a lot of you are thinking, well, how do we get to dictate it if under the gun has the initiative and they open raised and they're c-betting? How do we get to dictate how the hand is played? Well, because we're last to act, we can determine how the hand is played after under the gun raises. So under the gun raises and it's on us on the button, we can determine whether we want to check, bet, call, raise, or fold. So we essentially dictate how the hand is played, and we can modify the way that it's played. So if we call, if they bet, then we're just going to go with the flow in regards to what they're doing. If we raise, we are then taking the initiative, and we can also choose whether to fold or not based upon what they do. And again, if they don't bet, we can check as well. So a lot of this dictates how the hand is played, and I'm actually going to show you how this is done with a couple of examples. So let's talk about on the next slide an important concept of position and equity. So what is equity? Well, equity is your probability of winning a hand. Simple as that. It's how often your hand will win if all the cards are dealt and the players go to showdown. So that's what equity is. Now remember, when we're talking about equity, the important point of the hand going to showdown. And we can rough estimate our equity in a hand using the rule of 2 and 4, which we'll talk about later in this course. So position and equity. Well, this gets back to the point of positional advantage and positional disadvantage. So when we're playing a hand in position, it's much easier to realize our equity due to our positional advantage that comes with playing in position. So when I'm saying realizing our equity, it's meaning realizing our probability of winning the hand. Conversely, when we're out of position, it's much harder to realize our equity because we're not last to act. We don't have all the information that our opponents have, and we don't get to determine how our opponents act. They see how we act, and then based upon how we act, they can accordingly choose an appropriate strategy. So when we're in position, we have a much higher chance of winning our rightful share of the pot than our out of position opponents. And you're going to see this throughout the course. So in summary, when we are playing hands in position, it's much easier to realize our equity, meaning our probability of winning the hand mathematically. And then when we're out of position, well, it's much harder to realize our equity. So let's take a look at a couple of example hands. And this is going to be the exact same hand, but we're going to play one hand out of position, and we're going to play another one in position. So we're going to look at playing a draw. So let's look at the hands. So under the gun open raises, button and small blind both call. We look down at 9-7 of clubs in the big blind, and we decide to make the call. The flop is 3-4-5 rainbow with one club. Under the gun fires out a continuation bet, button calls, small blind folds, and we decide to call as well with our gut shot straight draw and our backdoor flush draw here as well. So 6 is going to make our gut shot straight draw, and if we get run around our clubs, we're going to have the flush. The turn is the 10 of spades. Under the gun fires out a second continuation bet, button and I both decide to fold. So out of position, when under the gun fires a second continuation bet on the turn, both button and us, we both decide to fold out of position. So that's the first example. Now let's take a look at playing this in position. Under the gun open raises, middle position calls, and the action is on us on the button. So we were in the big blind, and now we're going to play the exact hand on the button in position to under the gun. So again, exact same hand. We look down at 9-7 of clubs. We make the call. The flop is 3-4-5 rainbow. Under the gun fires out a continuation bet. Middle position folds. We call with our gut shot straight draw and our flush draw in position. The turn is the 10 of spades. Under the gun fires a second continuation bet. We call again, and we go to the river. The river is the king of hearts. This time, under the gun decides to check. We fire out a bluff, and under the gun folds. So playing in position, we win the hand with a bluff. Playing out of position, we actually have to fold on the turn. So what's the difference here? Well, we have a lot more information in position, and we're also able to do something that is called a float. So in position, we can float. We can call with a drawing hand with the intention of either taking it down with a made hand, or when our opponent that had the initiative gives up, that gives us the possibility of bluffing or semi-bluffing as well. And in this example here, what we do is when our opponent checks on the river, we can represent that king of hearts, or we could represent any sort of a made hand, and we can bet there because we have absolutely no showdown value to win the hand, and it gives us the opportunity to try to win the hand with a bluff. But being out of position, it's much harder because we act first, and then our opponent is in position, and then they act. So with this example, we check, and then our opponent bets. We call. We check again, our opponent bets again. So they get to see what we do, and then they act accordingly. And being out of position, it's much harder because our opponent gets to see what we do, so they have more information on us. Conversely, being in position, we get to see what our opponent does post-flop, and then we determine exactly what we want to do in regards to playing the hand based upon what they're doing. So that extra knowledge, that extra information is highly valuable. Now, this may not make complete sense to you yet, but don't worry, because we're going to be covering lots of different topics, both on pre-flop play and post-flop play as we progress in the course, with lots of example hands and lots of detailed information. But I just want to introduce the concept of playing in position and how being out of position makes it more difficult to play versus being in position makes it much more easier to play because of that added information. Now let's talk about one more thing. Let's talk about how position alters our opening ranges pre-flop. So we're going to take a look at some pre-flop ranges in our pre-flop section of the course, but I want you to understand how position alters our opening ranges based upon where we're open raising from, whether that be from early position, middle position, late position, or the blinds. So in early position, when we choose to play a hand in early position, we have more opponents left to act than when we play a hand in late position, right? So when we are open raising under the gun, middle position, cutoff, and button are still left to act, and they're going to have position on us post flop. Now, if we open raise in the cutoff, then only button is going to have position on us post flop. So here's the thing with that, is the earlier the position we're in, the tighter our opening range should be. And let me highlight this because this is important. And you're going to see what these ranges look like later in the course. So why? Why does it need to be tighter when we're in early position versus when we're in a later position? Well, the more players that are left to act after us pre-flop, the more likely it is that one of them is going to come up with a better hand than we're opening raising with. So we don't want to be opening raising too weak of a hand, because the probability of one of our opponents looking down and having a better hand than us is higher than when we are opening raising in late position and there's less opponents left to act. So that's why we need to open up a tighter position in early position, in addition to being out of position to them post flop as well. Now let's talk about late position. So as we move to our later positions, and let me get rid of all my highlighting, we can open raise and open up our hand ranges to raise a wider range. Why? Because the fewer players that are left to act. Well, we just talked about it here, the exact opposite. The less likely it is that somebody is going to have a better hand than us. And this allows us to play weaker hands from late position. So you're going to learn when we talk about pre-flop play and post-flop play, we're going to talk about the importance of stealing the blinds from late position. And that's one of the reasons why we're able to make so much more money from the cutoff and the button than we are from early position, under the gun, and middle position. And that's also why we expect to lose money in the blinds, because we're out of position to everybody post-flop. So just some key takeaways from this slide is that early position, we want to open a tighter range because there's a lot more people left to act. Late position, we want to open up a wider range because there's less people left to act. So that's going to conclude our discussion on position. We're going to talk about this a lot throughout the course. So when I talk about lots of different topics, the concept and the strategies revolving around position are always going to be something that's on our mind. So always think about position when you're playing a hand. And this is one of these topics where a lot of my students have this aha moment, because they really never considered position previously. And now they look at it and they're like, oh wow, position is really important. So I hope that you learned something valuable in this lecture. If you have any questions, let me know. If not, thanks for watching, and I'll see you at the next video.